Now, it is generally known that there is no exact best ship for PvP or PvE. The Apocalypse series and the CyanSea are the two most popular PvE ships to date. And it always kind of crossed my mind, well, how would these two ships directly compare? And that's what we are going to be trying to find out today. Now again, I've been flying the Cyan carrier, I've been flying the Apocalypse Navy and the Apocalypse Striker, and honestly, all of these ships have their unique things, and I wouldn't really say that one is better than the other. After all, it really does depend on the player and basically what the player prefers. Now this Apocalypse Navy is built for PvE. I think I've shown you this ship a long time ago, but the only thing that I've changed, I added a 4th heatsink and everything else looks to be the same. So this is a classic PvE Apocalypse Navy. Of course, your build might look a bit different. I mean, all of our builds are kind of different in one way or the other, but this is what I would be using for PvE when it comes to this ship. And it has some decent DPS, 2.5. Now, I'm not going to be using a nanocore for any of the ships today. Of course, the nanocore will increase your DPS quite a bit. The thermo 2 cores are said to be the best nanocores for DPS, although I like to say that you can use any core that you have. You don't have to have the best of the best. I mean, you don't really compete when it comes to ISK generation in the game. You basically try to do as, try to do as best as you can. It's not really a competition who can create more ISK. It is something that is, up to the player again, but as you can see, this ship has a lot, and I mean it has a lot of nanocores. I kind of forgot how many nanocores that have been added to the game. I mean, there's just a lot of them. You also have purple, blue, and green. It took me a while to actually get to the end of the list here. So, let me show you the CyanSea carrier. Now, oh, by the way, I'll be using the focused crystal implant. This is the, well, when it comes to lasers, the most popular implant for PvE. It's very easy to use, and it does have a very nice DPS output in the end. It does have lower DPS than it used to be. This implant has been nerfed at least 3 different times in 3 different updates. In 3 different balance updates. The Apocalypse used to have a maximum of about 25 to 45,000 DPS depending on what build you have. Now I think it's peaking around, maybe around like 16,000 DPS at best if you have tier 4 rigs and if you have the ship rigged out for, decked out for basically PvE if you have expensive lasers and stuff. But now the DPS is much lower than it used to be back when the implants were originally released. And well, that brings us to the CyanSea carrier. Now this thing, I've been using it a lot. I've had it on the live server as well, and it's a pretty relaxing ship to use, although definitely has some, well, downsides to it. Now I'll be removing the nanocore because, as I mentioned, this video will be done without any nanocores equipped, and we can see that the CyanSea has a lot more cold DPS than the Apocalypse Navy. Now again, the DPS on the ship is going to vary depending on what fighters you have. Might be lower, might be higher than the DPS that I'm showing you here, but again, it all depends on the skills, depends on the rigs, and depends on what fighters you are using. The offense fighters will definitely do a lot more DPS than this, but the offense fighters are also very expensive, so most players don't have them, I believe. I haven't really seen a lot of them out there, so I'll just keep the more easily affordable, the cheaper ones for the test. Right, and with the CNC kit I'll be using the aerospace tactic implant, which did improve the ship quite a bit. I would say the fighters have also been improved with the addition of the new skills. I mean, there's been a lot of new things added that has changed the overall performance of a lot of different weapon systems, and I believe fighters and drones have definitely been improved a bit more than the previous weapon systems. But again, it could also be that
We're under attack.
the lasers or artillery cannons or other weapons have also been equally improved. But from my perspective, it does feel like drones and fighters or light ships have received most buffs in the recent months
We're
with the
under
updates.
attack.
And I'll start the PvE with the Apocalypse Navy. Now, the Apocalypse Navy was the #1 PvE ship right before the CNC carrier was released. Well, I say Apocalypse Navy. The Apocalypse Striker or Navy were and still are one of the more popular PvE ships out there. Now, the ship here has some advantages over the CNC carrier. It has a very interesting implant, which does increase DPS as longer you keep firing, and that might be very useful. It is very useful for PvE. It can also be useful for PvE, although it can also be used for PvP, but its PvP capability has been changed. You used to be able to charge the implant on the gate, on the station, but now you can't really do that. Although you can do the same thing with other implants, you can't do that anymore with the focus crystal, because that's one of the things that have been nerfed. I really find it funny how everyone had their eyes on the lasers and on the Apocalypse Striker and the Navy with the focus crystal, but no one had their eyes on actual big problems like we have now with the Bomber Tactic implant, which is still the same effect as it used to be. It got buffed once, and ever since it got buffed once, it's basically the same as it used to be. So I believe there's been way too much focus on the focused crystal. I know a pun wasn't intended, but everyone was focusing too much on this implant, and other equally as problematic or even more problematic implants have left ignored basically. So now we have this situation where some implants have been nerfed more than others. And that's kind of what the community has been relying to the developers, and the developers listened, and they did do that thing where some implants have been nerfed more than others. Doesn't mean that other implants will stay the same, probably will have the same fate. I still say that all of the implants will eventually be nerfed.
Ships detected.
But right now the focus crystal is definitely not the most problematic implant. I mean, even the pulse crystal can give you better DPS nowadays and faster, because you don't have to charge the pulse crystal while you have to charge this one, and if you miss the target with the focused crystal, then yeah, it's over for the stacks. You can't miss with this implant. If you miss, you lose DPS basically. So yeah, 5,700 DPS. Okay, that's not that bad when fully charged. Now I'll also show the DPS when this is in siege mode, and I'll show the maximum possible DPS we can get with this ship when all the 4 heat sinks are active at once. Now, one major difference between the normal ships, subcapitals like battleships, and their damage mods and the CNC carrier. The damage mods on the carrier are active modules. You turn them on once, and they automatically cycle. So their DPS bonus is consistent. Meanwhile, the damage mods on the other ships usually have like a 30 to 45 second active duration time, and then they have a 180 or 150 seconds cooldown. So the CNC carrier and all carriers in all carrier-based ships, fighter-based ships, will have higher DPS than the subcapitals. This is just the way how the modules are working. The modules on the carriers are active, meanwhile the damage mods on the subcapitals are not really active. They are, I would say, semi-active, 50. Well, they're more of a passive module than active, because technically when you turn them on, it's basically like overheating them. So it has a short active duration time, but it's not lasting nearly as long as the damage mods on the fighter based ships, on the capitals, which is the main, I would say, main difference between the ships here, and probably going to be the reason why there is such a big difference in the clear time. Now the alpha damage on this ship is pretty good, and the total maximum hot DPS on this ship is going to be just a little bit lower than the maximum DPS that we see on the carriers. Now, the difference is the carrier does keep that DPS when you turn on the damage mods. Meanwhile, this DPS is a short burst on the ships. So the carrier-based ships, or the fighter-based ships, the carriers, they definitely have much higher, and not only higher DPS, but their DPS is also much stable. Now that's exactly not a big deal, since most of the carriers and super carriers cannot enter high sec, and this only leaves us to the CyanSea carrier, which can enter high sec, and it's probably the most unique ship because of that ability to enter anywhere. Basically you can find that ship anywhere you want. And that brings us to the question, well, if the CyanSea carrier can enter high sec, is it actually, you know, a smarter and better idea to invest in a CyanSea carrier than to invest in a Apocalypse Striker or Apocalypse Navy? Now, first thing that comes to mind is, well, what are the skill requirements? How much do you have to skill into these ships? The Apocalypse Navy here definitely needs some time to skill into, because it uses expert skills, and some of the expert skills for all 5 take a very long time to complete. Now, the advanced skills on the CyanSea here, I believe, take a bit less time to complete, but you have so many carrier-based skills that the skill time between the ships is, I think the total skill time at the moment is definitely in the favor of the Apocalypse, since for the carriers you have a lot of different things to skill into, and the capital skills are by default, they take a bit longer than the sub-capital skills to complete. So I would actually be letting this well, let's say it's very similar, that's the skill requirements, although the Apocalypse a bit easier to skill into, because you have like 2 or 3 skills to focus to, and that's about it. Now on the fighters, you have a lot of fighter related skills, and all of them can take quite a while to complete. And not only the Navy, but the classic Apocalypse Striker, it only also requires advanced skills, and you get some pretty good DPS on the Apocalypse Striker, actually very similar DPS to the Apocalypse Navy, almost the same DPS, just a very subtle little difference if you have all the expert skills on level 5 for the ship. So the Apocalypse Striker might actually be the best cost-effective PvE ship when it comes to this little comparison here. And the Apocalypse Striker is definitely easier to skill into that than to skill into the CyanSea carrier, for example. Now the other thing that we have to look into is the ship price. How much does a Navy cost? Well, the Navy on the market used to be 2 billion, then now I believe it's about 5 or 6 billion, which is an okay price. The real price is much higher though. About 15 billion is the estimated whole price of the ship, of all the navies actually. And what is the build requirement for the CyanSea carrier? Well, the build requirement for that thing is, let's say it's 50% of a super carrier. It's very expensive. One of the most expensive carriers in the game actually. So it is definitely, if you want to build them, it's much cheaper to build a Navy or a Striker than to build a CyanSea carrier. Although we all know that the CyanSea carrier is out from, you can get the ship from boxes. There's, I think, tons of boxes out there at the moment, even on the market. So the price of the CyanSea carrier is about 35 to 45, in some cases 55 billion. which is definitely 10 times more expensive than a navy, or about 20 times more expensive than a Apocalypse Striker. Now, that's quite a difference in price, and it does also offer some very interesting differences in performance. I mean, you get more stable DPS, you get a ship that can push more DPS by default. So the pricing is maybe justified if the ship remains at about 30-55 billion ISK. If the price does one day go to its actual building cost price, about 350 to 650 billion, or in some cases nearly a trillion ISK, then I would say it's not really worth it, because that would be way too expensive for that ship. But at the moment, the price to performance, you know, when you include all the things, it is very close to actually being justified. The only thing that the only reason why it's justified is because of the boxes, and a lot of boxes have been sold, and there's a lot of CNC ships out there. So that's what's bringing the price of that ship. Now, if that's the case, well, then the Apocalypse Striker might actually be a nice little skipping stone if your goal is to have a CNC carrier. Then, of course, if you have all the skills necessary and whatnot, the Apocalypse Striker is definitely a good skipping stone to farm enough ISK to get the CNC carrier, and you can completely skip the Apocalypse Navy. Which is, if you plan to do that, you know, it's a bit justifiable, and well, it's an okay move, I would say. If you want to get a CNC carrier, go ahead and, you know, grab the ship. Now, when it comes to clear speed, the warp speed is also quite important, and the Apocalypse can technically be faster in high sec when it comes to normal encounters because of the warp speed. And it is very interesting, but despite their differences in DPS, the Apocalypse Navy might actually pull ahead a little bit because of the fact that it is a faster ship. It can go from point A to point B very rapidly. After all, it's a battleship, and battleships are generally more faster than the capital counterparts. So in normal encounters, definitely the Apocalypse Navy and Striker can outperform the CNC carrier because of how fast they can move from one mission to the other. However, when it comes to the more, let's say, more dangerous missions, in this case the laboratory missions that I'm currently running, the Apocalypse Navy can still, and the Apocalypse Striker can still clear them fast. Although, when it comes to these missions, it's not as easy, or should I say it's not as relaxing to run them with a Navy than to run them with a CNC carrier, because with the Navy you have to be careful. You don't want to be at zero, definitely don't want to be at zero. You have to pick targets carefully because you don't want small ships to get close to you. You can run the ship AFK if you like. AFK Apocalypse Navy in high sec is actually a pretty common thing to see nowadays, but it will reward you more if you actively play it, and the total performance depends on what targets you pick. And as I mentioned before, you have to focus targets, and you have to be careful not to let them get too close to you, and you also have to be careful not to let the fighters, if you have a CNC carrier spawn, to get close to you. No. With the CNC carrier, you can just warp at zero in a high-sec laboratory without a problem. You can just land at zero, and it's a capital ship. It has very nice DPS, it has some decent defenses, and you can literally land the ship here, lock all targets, and go fully AFK, and this thing will just run. It will clear them one by one, and you don't have to do much. It will almost clear everything by itself, if it can lock by itself, of course. If you have a AI core for this thing, then yeah, it can just solo run these anomalies without much of a problem. I'm not saying that you should just go AFK of CNC carrier in one of these missions, because that's not really something I would trust the AI with, because these things are big kill mails, but it is something that it can do. and definitely runs the laboratories better than any navy that I've seen. Maybe the Raven Navy might be a good contender in one way, but from what I've seen, definitely the CNC runs these anomalies much smoother and with much less stress, because you know it just hits any ship with the same force. It's using a fighter-based weapon system, so they're basically big drones, and they will have good tracking. They will have good everything basically. So you're not going to encounter any problems when it comes to
Enemy ships
missing targets
detected.
or application. They will just cut through all of these
We're
ships
under
without
attack.
much of a problem. So for laboratories, it's much more relaxing and faster to run them with a CNC kit than any navy that there is currently available. Maybe the Raven Navy might be a very interesting choice because the missiles have been improved and buffed multiple times now, and the Raven Navy is a pretty scary ship. Not gonna lie, that thing became quite the beast. So that would be, I guess, one exception to the rule, the Raven Navy, but I believe the CNC care will still kind of pull ahead a little bit when it comes to the total result in the end, just because of how the ship runs. It does definitely run in a way much more chill than the other navies. Well, at least that is currently the case, and the CNC carry is also one of the more common ships that you are going to see out there. As I mentioned before, it is obviously in the game it's easy, right? You don't really compete with anyone in each generation. You should always focus to do better than you previously did, but I don't really would say that you should compare your ISK per hour output to other players, because that is something that is something that I kind of look like. I look at it as a personal thing basically. Doesn't matter how much ISK you make. If you make ISK that is sufficient for what you're doing, that's enough. That's basically, you know, all that matters. But if you don't really should compare your ISK per hour generation to other, you know, other players, because again it's a personal thing, and it doesn't matter if you make 100 or 200 million per hour. If it's sufficient and enough for what you're doing with the ships and with the game, and if it can sustain your ships and everything else, then obviously that's more than enough for you know, for what you're doing. And in my case, my ISK generation is a bit all over the place, mostly because I'm mostly doing PvP, and PvP is a bit of a different thing. My ISK per hour is not really what players would say stable, mostly because I'm doing everything that pirates usually do. And my ISK generation usually depends on the loot that I get. Sometimes I get nothing, sometimes I get a pretty fat reward. Sometimes, you know, you kill a faction, battleship, or something similar along those lines, and it can reward you pretty nicely. As it goes for PvE, it is very well stable. Is definitely the word that I would use. It's very stable, and if you know what you're doing, then it will definitely be a very decent ISK income. Of course, besides PvE, you can do exploration, which is a part of PvE, but I don't really count it as PvE for different reasons. But it's also a viable option if you want to do exploration. It also works really well. we can already see that the CNC carrier here is pulling ahead of the Navy. I mean, definitely clears faster. Although it is very interesting to note that the DPS difference is about 6 or 7,000 more DPS on the CNC carrier, but the Apocalypse Navy seems to be having some pretty decent alpha hits. So the alpha damage is definitely very close to what we see on both ships, although it still does feel like the CNC might be pulling ahead just a little bit more. Well, I say a little bit more, it does fire a bit faster, and actually, you know what? Based from what I've seen here, I would actually say that the Apocalypse Navy in siege mode might actually have more alpha damage than the CNC carrier here. But the CNC carrier has more rate of fire with the fighters, so of course that is going to produce more damage down the road, and again, that's okay.
Enemy ships detected. We're under attack.
Well, I think so far, I mean, I would say both ships have been performing really well. Can't really complain about the performance, honestly. Both have been really well. Of course, we will see what will happen down the road. I mean, we might see some new ships. I mean, there's a good chance that we will see some new ships with lasers. So we will see how it will go. I know that in some of the recent updates there have been some adjustments to some of the implants. There's been some adjustment to I think their usage. In the last update they have increased the implant fuel usage. Some of the implants have actually received some reduction in usage, but all of the implants, from what I've seen, have seen a increase in how much fuel they're using. So maybe the implant fuel price also kind of plays a role. I mean, I don't know how much. I have to check how much of the implant I've used on the Focus Crystal and how much I've used on the Aerospace Tactic. Although it feels like the Aerospace Tactic is not using as much fuel as the Focus Crystal. But I have to do a test to see which implant does use more fuel. I know that the Bomber Tactic uses a lot of fuel. That one is expensive, but we will see if that's going to change down the road. Maybe it will, maybe not. But the extra fuel usage, maybe of weird updates, maybe a weird nerf. I don't know. I would definitely be more happy to see the total damage reduced, but I don't know, maybe I'm just missing something here, I don't know, but overall it's been a very, I just looked at the patch notes from a couple weeks ago, and you know, when I looked at, actually it was last week I believe, and yeah, that's kind of something that slipped my mind. I actually thought it was a damage decrease, but turns out it's the durability has been, well, the durability, the implant use has been improved. Was kind of a maybe unexpected or unexpected thing. I have absolutely no idea. But in any case, what would be the final result here? Well, you know, if you like to fly the CNC carrier, then you can keep using the CNC carrier. I mean, that's, I think the point of games is to have fun, right? So if you have fun flying this thing, keep flying it. If you have fun flying the Apocalypse or Apocalypse Navy, well, keep flying that ship as well. I would say that all of the three ships mentioned today are fun, and honestly, I love all of them. I mean, I've been using all of them. I had the chance to fly all of them, and I had a chance to see what all of them can do. And honestly, I'm pretty happy with their performance. Every one of these ships has their place, and if you love flying them, then keep on flying them, I guess. After all, if it's fun, then that's the point of games, I guess. So, with that being said, hope you guys enjoyed. If you would like to support me, feel free to like and subscribe. And with that being said, stay safe, fly safe, and as always, I'll see you next time.